The drone holds a hover at roughly 400 meters, and below it sits a Russian main battle tank that should not be sitting at all. It is canted in an open field, hull tilted left, and the front of its running gear is wrong. One road wheel is simply gone. Where a wheel belongs there is a gap, a swing arm hanging at the wrong angle, and a track shed loose into the dirt. The engine is cold, the hatches are open, no crew in frame. Hours later, a Russian channel will log this vehicle as a routine recovery in progress. The metal disagrees. So how does one missing wheel tell you whether this crew drove into a minefield nobody warned them about, or whether the tank simply fell apart? Rear tension _checkpoint 030 hook resolution Ts. This is not a battle. There is no enemy in the frame, no incoming fire, no smoke trail. There is a static vehicle in daylight and a recon feed running just under 2 minutes. And yet everything we need to reconstruct what happened to this tank is already present, written into the bent steel of its suspension. Battle damage assessors call this reading the wreck. The vehicle is the witness. Our job in the next 20 minutes is to interrogate it, separate 3 very different causes that all leave a tank stranded, and watch which one survives contact with the evidence. The tank is a T-72 family hull, almost certainly a T-72B3 or B3M variant, judging by the turret stowage and the welded panels along the side. It belongs to a Russian mechanized unit operating in eastern Ukraine in the summer of 2024, on a stretch of front where armor pushes forward through tree lines and tilled fields toward dug-in defensive positions. The exact unit is not stamped on anything we can see, so we will not invent one. The unit, on the public record, stays unnamed. What we can read is the machine, and the machine is specific. Why does a single immobilized tank matter on a front where vehicles are lost in numbers most weeks? Because the cause of loss is intelligence. A tank knocked out by a missile tells you the enemy has working anti-armor teams in that sector. A tank that threw its track tells you Russian maintenance is failing. A tank sitting on a mine crater tells you there is an unmarked minefield in ground that someone's map said was clear, and the next vehicle through is about to find it the hard way. Same dead tank, 3 completely different stories, 3 different sets of orders that should follow. Get the cause wrong and you brief the next crew into the same field. So here is the framework: 3 hypotheses, 3 forensic fingerprints. First, a mine strike. The tank rolls onto a buried anti-tank charge and the blast comes up from below into the running gear. Second, a thrown track. Pure mechanical failure, worn components, bad tension, no enemy action at all. The track simply walks off its path and the vehicle grinds to a halt. Third, battle damage from a top-attack munition, a missile or loitering weapon that strikes from above where the armor is thinnest. Each of these does something physically distinct to the hull, and the differences are not subtle once you know where to look. I spent the better part of an evening going through frame-by-frame stills of feeds exactly like this one, and one detail keeps surfacing. People argue about the cause of a tank loss from the wrong part of the vehicle. They look at the turret, the smoke, the silhouette. The answer is almost always lower down, in the suspension, a part of the tank nobody photographs for glamour, and the one part that cannot lie about what direction the force came from. To read it, you have to understand how the tank is built underneath. A T-72 rides on 6 road wheels per side. Each wheel sits on the end of a swing arm, a heavy steel crank also called a balance beam, and that arm is sprung by a torsion bar, a long rod of spring steel that runs transverse all the way across the floor of the hull, anchored on the far side. When the wheel rides up over a bump, the arm rotates and twists the bar. The bar's resistance pushes the wheel back down. It is a clean, robust, entirely mechanical system with no shock absorber visible from outside on most stations. That architecture is the key to everything that follows, because each cause of failure loads that architecture in a different direction. Retention _checkpoint, 4 o'clock stakes bend. And here is the complication that recasts this whole frame. While analysts are looking at the wreck, a Russian telegram channel posts the same field with a different caption: "Recovery in progress, the vehicle being prepared for towing rearward." That is not a trivial claim. If it is true, this tank is a maintenance casualty, soon back in the fight, and the loss means almost nothing. If it is false, somebody is laundering a combat loss into a logistics footnote. The claim is unverified. No recovery vehicle is anywhere in the frame, no crew, no tow cable, no security element. But it has to be tested, not dismissed, because the entire meaning of the engagement hangs on which version of events the steel supports. Start with the obstacle every analyst hits first: resolution. The feed is consumer-grade drone optics, downscaled before it was ever posted, and at 400 meters the damaged hub is barely 14 pixels across. You cannot read a sheared torsion bar in 14 pixels. The solution is patience and the descent. Watch the feed long enough and the operator drops the drone, closer passes, lower orbits, and across a sequence of frames you stack the detail, building a composite far sharper than any single image. By the time the drone is at perhaps 120 meters, the running gear resolves. Now we can work. What does a mine actually do to this system? The charge detonates beneath or just outboard of the wheel, and the blast wave travels upward. It tears the road wheel off entirely or shatters it. It bends the swing arm violently up and rearward, often beyond its travel stop. And critically, it can shear the torsion bar, snap that spring steel rod inside the hull, which is why a mine-struck arm hangs slack and crooked, with no spring left to hold the wheel down even if the wheel survived. The blast scores the lower hull with carbon and soot in a fan that radiates up and outward. It peels the side skirt, it breaks the track at the detonation point, leaving a clean parted run rather than a neatly shed loop, and underneath in the soil it leaves a crater. Hold that picture, because we are going to come back to the crater. It is the single most decisive piece of evidence in this entire investigation, and we cannot see it yet, which is the second obstacle. The drone is nearly overhead. From directly above, the missing wheel is a shadowed gap, and the ground beneath it is hidden by the hull itself. You cannot assess a crater you cannot see. The solution is geometry and time. As the drone orbits, the sun angle and the oblique view eventually expose the ground forward and outboard of the wheel station, and a disturbance in the soil comes into frame, a darker ejected fan of earth thrown away from the hull. File that. We will measure it later. The investigation was building toward a clean answer. Then the side mystery surfaced. The hatches are open, both the driver's and a turret hatch. There are no crew in frame, no bodies, no blood visible, and a faint set of disturbed tracks leads away from the vehicle toward a tree line to the rear. Where did the crew go, and does their absence point to a violent loss or a survivable one? Hold that question. The suspension will answer it too, and the answer is not what the drone's first frames suggest. Now we eliminate. Take the thrown track hypothesis first, because it is the one the Russian recovery claim quietly leans on. A mechanical failure is exactly the kind of thing you tow home and fix. A thrown track has an unmistakable signature, and it is a signature of absence. All 6 road wheels are present and intact. There is no scorching, no carbon fan, no peeled skirt. The track is shed as a continuous loop, walked off the sprocket and idler and lying bunched along the hull, often after a hard turn at speed or from worn track pins and bad tension. There is no crater because there was no explosion. The vehicle is mechanically embarrassed, not wounded. Most people assume a tank that has lost a wheel and shed its track is the textbook thrown track case. The wheel fell off, the track came with it. Simple. The evidence here tells a different story, and it tells it in one detail. The track on this tank is not shed as a continuous loop. It is parted, broken cleanly at the front station, exactly where the wheel is missing, with the forward run flung out of line and the rear run still seated. A track does not break itself at the precise station where a wheel has vanished. Something broke them together in the same instant, with force coming from one direction. Thrown track is out, and with it goes the comfortable maintenance casualty story. So we are down to 2 causes, both violent: a mine from below or a munition from above. The thrown track theory is dead, the recovery claim is on life support, and the open hatches still have not been explained. But before we can read the crater that should settle it, there is a third suspect to clear, and ruling it out depends entirely on a part of the tank that so far looks completely normal. Here is the take that will probably draw fire in the comments. A mine strike like this one is not, fundamentally, a Ukrainian success story. It is a Russian record-keeping failure. The most effective anti-armor weapon on some stretches of this front was never a missile or a drone. It was a clipboard that nobody updated, a minefield map that went stale, a defensive belt laid in one phase of the fighting and never logged for the units that advanced through it later. We will come back to why that fingerprint is on this very wreck. For now, sit with the discomfort of it. Armies lose tanks to their own forgotten ground, and they almost never admit it. Cases like this keep surfacing the same uncomfortable fact. Modern armoured warfare is as much a war of paperwork as firepower. The difference between a cleared lane and a killing field is often one accurate map overlay, passed or not passed between two units that barely talk to each other. This wreck is what that gap looks like. The crew did everything a crew is supposed to do, and the system that was supposed to protect them simply did not have the record. Now the top attack hypothesis, and this is where the suspension architecture pays off completely. A top attack munition, the kind of weapon designed to strike where armor is thinnest, comes down onto the roof. It punches the turret top or the engine deck and drives its effect downward, into the crew or the power pack. If the round defeats the armor and reaches the ammunition, you get the catastrophic signature everyone recognizes: the turret unseated, displaced, sometimes thrown clear entirely. The running gear in that scenario is collateral. It does not selectively remove one front road wheel while leaving everything else pristine. Look at this tank's roof. Look at the turret. The turret is seated normally on its ring. There is no roof penetration, no scorched entry hole on the deck, no downward directed blast scarring on the upper surfaces, no displacement. The damage is exclusively low, exclusively at one forward station, and exclusively consistent with force travelling up and outward, not down and inward. A top attack hit that left the turret untouched but surgically deleted a single road wheel does not exist in the physics. The munition from above theory cannot account for what we see. It is eliminated. That leaves one cause standing. But elimination is not proof. To convict the mine, we have to put the crater on the stand. And this is where that soil disturbance we filed away earlier becomes the deciding evidence. Now that the drone has given us an oblique angle, the ground forward and outboard of the missing wheel resolves. A shallow crater, with a fan of darker displaced earth thrown away from the hull, and a clear lip of ejector. There is no such disturbance under any other wheel station. The blast happened here, beneath this exact wheel, with the soil thrown outward. The textbook mark of an upward detonation. A crater is not just a yes or no on the mine. Read carefully, it estimates the charge, crater diameter and depth scale with explosive mass, and the spread of the ejector fan tells you how much energy went into moving the earth. Measure this one against the known dimensions of the T-72's road wheel, roughly 750 millimeters across, which gives us a built-in ruler sitting right next to the hole. The crater reads modest, not the wide, deep gouge of an oversized improvised charge, or a stacked anti-tank stack. Not the shallow scuff of a small anti-personnel device either. It sits squarely in the range of a standard buried anti-tank mine, something on the order of 7 to 9 kilograms of explosive, the class of the common TM62 series mine that has been seeded across this war by both sides in enormous numbers. Retention_checkpoint, 15 o'clock microfinal plus cliffhanger Tunno. So the verdict is in. A single buried anti-tank mine, detonated under the front left wheel station, sheared the torsion bar, blew off the road wheel, parted the track, and stopped this tank in open ground. Case closed on the cause. But the most important questions are still standing. The open hatches, the missing crew, and the one nobody asked at the start. Whose mine was it, and why did this tank drive onto it at all? The answers turn this from a forensics exercise into something with a body count behind it. Start with the crew, because the suspension answered that too, and the answer is mercifully unglamorous. A buried anti-tank mine of this size, detonating under the suspension, is a vehicle-disabling event. It wrecks the running gear and shocks the hull, but the crew compartment of a T-72 sits well above and behind the front wheel station. The geometry favors survival. Combine that with the open hatches and the footprints leading rearward, and the most consistent reconstruction is the simplest. The crew felt the blast, found themselves immobilized but alive, and dismounted and walked out under their own power. That is what the evidence supports. The drone's first frames suggested a tomb. The forensics suggest an evacuation. Put yourself in the driver's seat for a second. You are pressing forward across a field your maps say is clear. Your unit is advancing, and the ground under your left track erupts. The tank slews and dies. You are not on fire, you are not bleeding out, but you are sitting motionless in open daylight. You have no idea whether there is a second mine a meter to either side, and there is a drone somewhere overhead recording everything. What would you have done at that moment? Sat tight and waited for a recovery that, the evidence shows, was never coming? Or done what these men appear to have done and walked? Tell us where you'd have drawn the line. Now the deeper question, whose mine? A single, isolated, buried anti-tank charge in a tilled field, with no companion craters in frame and no scatter pattern, points away from a freshly delivered scatterable minefield, the kind dropped by rocket or artillery, which lands in a dense, recognizable spread. This reads more like a hand-emplaced or settled mine in established ground, and that is where the earlier observation closes its loop. On contested fronts, both armies have lost vehicles to belts their own side, laid in an earlier phase, and never properly logged for the units that came after. A defensive minefield seeded 1 month becomes an invisible hazard the next, when the line moves and the maps don't catch up. We cannot prove from one feed that this was Russian-laid ground, but the isolated single-charge signature is exactly what stale, unmarked friendly mines produce. A tank driving confidently onto its own army's forgotten work. There is a line in the way OSINT loss-tracking projects log cases like this that has always stuck with me. They will not write mine strike unless the evidence forces it. They will write abandoned, cause undetermined, and leave it open for months rather than guess. The discipline is the opposite of the breathless caption. The wreck gets entered, geolocated where possible, cross-referenced against other footage of the same sector, and only when the suspension, the crater, and the absence of any other signature all agree does the entry harden into a confirmed cause. That patience is the whole difference between intelligence and noise. In the days after a feed like this surfaces, the open source community does exactly that work in public, comparing the hull markings, the field, the tree line, and the drone's track against satellite imagery to pin a location and a date, and watching for any Russian footage that might support the recovery claim. No tow vehicle ever appears in the follow-on imagery for this kind of case. The recovery claim quietly dies of neglect, not refuted with a press release, just never substantiated, the way most unverified battlefield claims end. The tank stays in the field. Eventually it is logged, by the visual record rather than by any official admission, as a combat loss to a mine. We left one frame out of this breakdown for honesty's sake. There is a faint second disturbance in the soil, perhaps a dozen meters back along the tank's approach path, that may be nothing, a tractor rut, a shadow, an artifact of compression, or maybe a second mine the crew rolled straight past on the way in. We could not confirm it on the available footage, and we will not call it what we cannot prove. If you have worked demining or battle damage assessment, and you can read ejector and soil disturbance better than a drone feed allows, that frame is the one worth arguing about. The comments are open for it. What does one missing wheel finally tell us? That a tank can be read like a document if you know its grammar. The torsion bar tells you the direction of the force. The parted track tells you it was sudden and violent, not mechanical. The intact turret roof rules out the weapon from above, and the crater with the roadwheel as its ruler names the charge and convicts the mine. From a static vehicle in a quiet field, with no shot fired on camera, we reconstructed a cause, an approximate charge size, the likely fate of the crew, and the institutional failure that probably put them there, the minefield nobody warned them about. So much of this war is not decided by the dramatic strike, but by the unglamorous ground, mines laid and forgotten, maps that fall out of date, the gap between what a crew is told and what is actually buried in the dirt ahead of them. The tank that lost a roadwheel on camera never met an enemy that day. It met a clerical failure with 7 kilograms of explosive behind it. If reading a crippled machine the way an assessor does, is the kind of forensics you want to see more of. The breakdown of how analysts confirm armor losses frame by frame is the one to watch next. Same discipline, a very different wreck.